I'm so happy to be with you all. Week ago, I had a tooth taken out. This doesn't seem like something that one would ordinarily announce. But the fact is that for a long time it was extremely infected, and as soon as it was taken out, I felt better. So since that event, I've been writing lots of articles and have been much busier than I'd been for a long time. I was beginning to worry that old age was creeping up on me and incapacitating me. But I've been very happy to see that Master is still hard at work through me. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, and then I want to read one of those articles and talk about that. One of the things I wanted to talk about is that I was reminiscing the times I used to be with Ananda Moyima and the 4 days that I spent with Sri Rama Yogi, who was the most advanced disciple of Ramana Maharshi. And all of those times were extremely inspiring for me. But I was reflecting that there were things that they said, and both of them were very highly advanced. I mean, they knew God. But they didn't completely go along with what my guru said. And I've realized that as you go to different teachers, you don't always get the same teaching. For example, something that Ramana Maharshi said and Sri Rama Yogi said to me is you should ask yourself, who am I? I said, well, that isn't what my master said. And he said, if all the disciples understood their masters, there wouldn't be all the fighting that you see in religion today. And of course that's true. But nonetheless, Master put a different emphasis on it. And that's what I'm really saying. He said, for example, he told us to memorize his poem Samadhi. He used to try to tell us to feel that you are infinite, that you're not just this body. It all comes down to the same thing. Who are we? But it put a different emphasis on it. And each one of them, and I've visited many saints in this country, each one has a little different way of saying it, which, until one is well on the path, can be confusing. And so the tendency that some people have to try a way and then try another way and try another way, it's like going from here to Jaipur in a Maruti and then deciding, no, it should have been a whatever, I don't know all the car makes. But if every time you get just about 50 miles down the road, you decide you'd better go another way, but you have to start all over again. Better to stay with one way that is true and follow it to the end. And in these teachings of Masters, it's certainly a new slant on many things. I think, for example, that one thing that happened, it happened more after foreign invasion into India. Because if you read the Shastras and the Puranas, you find them extremely positive. They always, they embrace the whole of life. The Vedas, instead of sort of saying we're sadhus and we're meditating and the world is out there, they embrace the world. They teach you all kinds of things, how to succeed in your worldly desires and so on, and this is necessary. If you've got desires, then why not fulfill them in a spiritual way instead of an unspiritual way? If you want power, there are ceremonies you can perform to get power. If you want to destroy your enemy, you can do it. It's not what we today would be rigidly spiritual about, but it's Shastric. And the truth is that they were very life-affirming. Now, when people began invading, there became sort of a withdrawal. And you find that many sadhus, I remember this one whom I've mentioned, I believe, I met him in Puri, and this was back in 1959. He said to me, you shouldn't enjoy anything. And I said, not even a beautiful sunset? He said, no, nothing. Well, I can see that point of view. It's not wrong. On the other hand, it's awfully dry. And I think that our Guru's way is far more inviting when he says, enjoy it with the joy of God. When you say grace before a meal, you don't give the food to God. After all, you're going to eat it. It doesn't get thrown in the garbage can after you've given it to him. There is a true story, in fact, of somebody who the parents asked him to give this food to God, and they were going out, and when they came back, they said, well, now where's the food? He said, well, God ate it. And he did, in fact. But this is not the usual. What you usually mean when you say grace is that you want to share it with him, so that you're thinking of him while you eat, and you're not just galloping it. And so all these things must be understood primarily from the standpoint of what can we do about it. Now, one thing that I was extremely impressed with Master about was that he was much more, he was joyful. He was the kind of saint who no longer needs to affirm world rejection. And I used to find him laughing till the tears came down his cheeks. And yet, if I looked into his eyes, I saw there was nobody home. There was just, he was untouched by everything. And yet he could enjoy with the joy of God, and he wanted us to do that. Well, this is different from the path of that particular saint, and I will not say that he was wrong. He was 132 years old. You've got to have something to get to that age. But it's a different path, and each path is constructed in a certain way. The truth is one, but in the construction of that path, if you do this, then it won't work. And in the construction of that path, if you do this, it won't work. And so we should indeed, once we've decided, and of course in the beginning, people ought to decide. I had the very good fortune of not having to decide. I just knew. And when I read Autobiography of a Yogi, I was a very skeptical young man. And even as a child, my mother wanted to teach me. We were living in Romania, so we didn't have the English teachers there. And so my mother wanted to teach me how to write. And I said, how do you know? You're not a teacher, you're just a mother. Not very gracious of a little child. I was 5 years old. But indeed, I've always felt that way. And when I read Autobiography, I knew this is it. And it's sort of like a story of a soldier in World War II. He was in boot camp, and he kept picking up pieces of paper off the ground and looking at it. Oh, this isn't it. This isn't it. This isn't it. Finally, they recommended that he go to the camp psychiatrist. And he was in the psychiatrist's office picking up papers off the desk. No, this isn't it. This isn't it. Didn't pay any attention to the psychiatrist. So the psychiatrist recommended him highly for a medical discharge. And when they gave him the discharge, she said, this is it. So that too is the practice of neti. This isn't it, this isn't it. But when I saw that, when I met my guru, I knew that was it. The first words I said to him, I never imagined I'd ever say to anybody. I said, I want to be your disciple. And here I am, nearly 60 years later, still his disciple. I knew, I know, I'm sure. Well, let me read you one of the articles. I've been writing just about one a day. And this one is, and I've asked the members of our staff here to forgive me, because I'm going to read it again, but there's no harm in hearing again. So, it is The Great Delusions. Delusions are not, from a spiritual viewpoint, those individual aberrations which cause one to be committed to a mental asylum. Personal mental distortions of that kind might better be called illusions. Delusions, on the other hand, affect a wide range of humanity to the point of being almost universal. there may exist planets in the universe on which the residents are so sane that a vast majority of Earth's inhabitants would be considered crazy by comparison. With nearly everyone around us crazy in some way, however, we must simply accept that this world is itself a kind of madhouse. So. A delusion, then, is a widespread misperception of the true state of things. Purely subjective delusions may, by contrast, be called instead illusions. A delusion signifies addiction to anything that promises happiness or fulfillment of some comparable kind, but that always, in the end, brings disappointment. Delusions are consistent in one thing above all: they invariably break their promises. A man from Calcutta, whom I met in America many years ago, remarked to me, "Americans pride themselves on their freedom from superstition. But what superstition can be greater than the one I find almost universal in this country, that of expecting to find happiness in mere things?" What I have called the great delusions are classically three in number: wine, money, and sex. To that standard grouping, I am inclined to add two more: the desire for power and for fame. Wine includes any intoxicant that has a depressing or deadening effect on human awareness. Wine doesn't include medication, anesthesia, for example, which is necessary in operations, nor the medicines people take to reduce severe pain. Even pain medication, however, can become addictive if the use of it is prolonged. The chief danger in every case is addiction, even to painkillers. This is certainly true for intoxicants. Addiction is most particularly the danger of drinking alcohol in any form. Moreover, although some people claim that marijuana and other hallucinogenic drugs are non-addictive, indulgence in them carries with it at least the danger of psychological addiction. Anything that dulls one's awareness should, if possible, be shunned by all who aspire to superconscious awareness. What makes it a delusion is that it promises escape from reality by numbing one's awareness of it. People will often seek refuge in sleep for the same reason. Some people, again for that reason, commit suicide. In every case where people try to avoid objective reality, they will have to return sooner or later to the very circumstances they sought to escape. Intoxicants, on the other hand, since they are, as the word implies, toxic, reduce one's ability ever to relate realistically to objective circumstances. When a person recovers from an alcoholic hangover, he finds himself less able than before to cope with whatever difficulties he was facing. The spiritual path, on the other hand, far from being an escape from reality, offers an escape from all delusion to the only abiding reality there is. Many people, of course, take alcoholic drinks not to deaden their awareness, but simply to be sociable or for the stimulation they say it gives them. J.C. Bose, the great scientist of Bengal, noted that the effect of poison is frequently stimulating if taken in small amounts, despite the fact that it can kill if taken in larger amounts. Any stimulant, however, since it is imposed on the body from without, rather than generated inwardly by an affirmation of willpower, must come under the sway of duality. Because it is outward, it is part of the law that governs the manifested universe. Raising one's spirits artificially leads inevitably to their becoming correspondingly lowered afterward. As with every emotional high, artificial stimulates cause, and cannot but cause, a balancing low afterward. It is a mistake, therefore, to take alcoholic drinks, even socially. And although the negative effects of light drinking may not be noticeable immediately, they will become so in time. It is well, therefore, to heed from the beginning the wise counsel of the ages, rather than cater to passing social fads. Reflect that most of society is enslaved by an infinite number of misconceptions concerning how to live rightly. A student of Paramhansa Yogananda's heeded for a time his counsel to give up drinking alcoholic beverages. After a time, however, she found it inconvenient socially to abstain from such drinks altogether. Thus she began drinking a little beer or wine at parties. The next time she saw the master, he said to her severely, without prompting, "I meant all alcoholic beverages." There is another point to keep in mind. Anyone who was addicted to alcohol in his last life may find that addiction renewed in this life with even the first alcoholic drink he ever takes. Medical doctors, having noted this fact, attribute it to some chemical imbalance in the body. Intoxicants of all kinds promise what they never deliver: higher awareness, immunity to suffering, and happiness. A number of ways might be suggested for overcoming alcoholic addiction. Most of them lie outside the scope of this article, but one brief story might prove helpful to some. It concerns something else that Paramhansa Yogananda said. If you have an addiction to any false pleasure, substitute for it another one that will give you greater satisfaction. For example, if you've developed a taste for bad cheese, develop an opposite taste for good cheese. I met a man many years ago in San Diego who told me this story. I used to be an alcoholic. When I met Yogananda, I was inspired under his tutelage to seek God. Hoping for the best, I took Kriya initiation from him. My friends made fun of me, saying, "How can you make this important commitment when you can't even commit yourself to staying off the bottle?" I answered them, "I can't help my addiction, but at least I can do something positive at the same time to offset it." And so, as I sat each day for meditation, I held my Kriya beads in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other. And he used to do his Kriyas, and every now and then just take a sip and then put it down, keep doing his Kriyas. After some time, halfway through doing my Kriyas, I thought, I'm getting so much satisfaction from Kriya. What do I want with this silly whiskey? I set my glass aside and have never touched another drop of alcohol since then. The next of the great delusions is money. Money is not, as tradition tells us, the root of all evil, for we need it in countless life situations. In this sense, indeed, money itself may be called, again to use an expression of Yogananda's, a necessary necessity. We should try to make good use of it, therefore, and to overcome any desire for it or attachment to it. It isn't money, then, but the desire for money that is the root of all evil. These statements are true, for money in itself can never give happiness. Indeed, in itself, money isn't even attractive, especially when it has received too much handling. We won't find happiness either from anything we buy with money, but the desire for money itself is a principal delusion for the simple reason that it offers endless opportunities to satisfy the desire for all those things which we hope will bring happiness. Rich people, unless they are free from personal attachment to wealth, and use it primarily as a means of helping others are seldom happy, and have been found statistically to be less happy even than poor people. The possession of wealth opens up the possibility of satisfying, in quotes, an almost limitless number of desires. The rich person is likely to devote himself to looking around for what more possessions and exciting experiences he can accumulate to make him ever happier, though happiness has already eluded him completely so far. The law that governs desire was put succinctly by my guru. Desires, he said, ever gratified, meaning in the sense of always gratified, ever gratified, are never satisfied. The corollary is true also, though less absolutely so, never gratified, ever satisfied. And that was a very interesting thing. I remember, what was his name? Dash it. Oh, Hughes, Howard Hughes. He was probably, when he lived, the richest man in the world. And he became more and more of a recluse and withdrawing from everybody and everything. And some newspaper reporter got through to him just a week before he died. And he asked him, have you found happiness? He said, no, I can't say I found happiness. And his very tone of voice said that. Happiness doesn't come from that. It comes from being satisfied with what you have. I remember back in Arizona, after I'd been put out of SRF, and I had very little money. I was living on $10 a month. I was blissfully happy. I would go to the market to find the cheapest food that was available. I'd go to more than one market and find the bargains. And I would make dessert and make a teaspoon last for one meal. And so I had one dessert lasted a whole week. And in different ways, I'm not going to give you the whole technique for living with very little money, but really, you can be quite happy with very little. And my father, who, what happened in Romania was that one of his friends, one of our family friends, he sent his sons off to America to college, and they went bad. And he used to send them money all the time, and it didn't help. Well, unfortunately, my father took this as a lesson, and all he gave me was 50 cents allowance in high school, which is about 25 rupees of perhaps modern times, I don't know. Anyway, it didn't amount to much. In college, he gave me $3 a month. He could have given me more, but he wouldn't do it. And I was completely happy. I used to take my friends out and treat them to milkshakes and things. It didn't matter. We don't need money, but when you get into that thought, it becomes a disease. And the more you have, the more you want, and you're never happy with it. So that is the next one. What about the third of the great delusions, sex? Sex attraction was placed in mankind by nature to ensure the continuation of the species. The sex nerves are located at that part of the body, the bottom of the spine, where two important spinal nerves, the ida and the pingala, conjoin. In the practice of Kriya Yoga, the devotee learns gradually to neutralize the flow through these superficial outward nerves. If the descending current through pingala can be drawn inward as it reaches the base of the spine, causing it to flow upward through the deep spine or sushumna, true spiritual awakening begins with the rising of Kundalini. Otherwise, and for most people, that downward current through pingala coincides with a more superficial sense of withdrawal into the ego self. The downward movement coincides with disappointment or perhaps with the feeling of wanting personal reassurance, comfort, and satisfaction. Any withdrawal into the ego acts at that point as a stimulus to the sex nerves. It is no accident that people tend to enjoy sex at the time also when they are preparing to sink into sleep. Interestingly, masculine energy is more specifically related to the rising energy through Ida, and feminine more identified with the descending energy through Pingala. Thus, in the biblical story of the Garden of Eden, it was Eve who tempted and Adam who responded to that temptation. Had her energy flowed inward into the deep spine, instead of outward in dualistic reaction to Adam, the two of them would have continued to live in the inner paradise of soul consciousness. Instead, because most women try to draw men's attention to themselves, and because men respond by letting themselves be drawn, though to be fair, it is often the men themselves who extend the first invitation, even if they claim afterward that it was the woman who tempted them, the dance of duality continues. Duality is indeed, as I said, the basis on which the entire universe was created. Maya, too, makes women especially attractive to men and gives men a different appearance which to women is attractive. What is delusive about sexual attraction as such is most of all its reaffirmation of ego consciousness. Men and women, because of their attraction to one another, and in their efforts to attract one another as their own sexual opposites, hold particularly the thought, I, you. That thought, I, predominates, of course. I want something from you. For one who wants to find God, the ego is the supreme delusion to be overcome. It is the post to which all other delusions are tied. As long as we engage in any activity, even one only of thought, and as long as we do so with ego commitment, we will find it difficult to escape from ego consciousness. Most people, of course, are not prompted by high spiritual aspiration anyway. Even so, they must face the fact that until ego attachment is overcome, it will pursue them through their lives like a veritable hound of the Baskervilles, bringing them a constant renewal of suffering. Beyond these three great delusions, there are other major ones that might be included. Supreme among them is the craving for power. What makes this craving a delusion is, again, the affirmation that accompanies it of ego consciousness. All delusions, indeed, endanger one's peace of mind, strengthen the ego, and deepen one's sense of isolation from others, and from any sense he might have otherwise of support from the universe. The desire for power may be less obvious than the first three great delusions, but with many people this desire too is obsessive. Indeed, in our present technological age, the desire for power seems to be growing stronger as the number of opportunities for achieving power are increased. Power might be compared to the manipulation of chessmen on a chessboard. There is this important difference, however. A chess player may preen himself if he wins a game, but the manipulation of people from one post to another awakens in the manipulator also the thoughts that he must control them. This thought of exerting control over others obliges one constantly to reaffirm his own ego. A true leader will view his position as an opportunity to serve others. He will identify himself, therefore, with those he leads. The thought of serving them will lessen the sense of separation from them than he may have felt owing to ego consciousness. If a person exults in exerting power over others, however, he will of necessity think in terms of forcing them to obey his wishes. This expansion of one's own ego identity is quite the opposite of the spiritual practice of expanding the inner sense of oneness with all humanity and with all life. Power perforce, therefore, increases a person's ego consciousness and makes it all the more difficult for him to broaden his spiritual identity. Last, I'll mention a delusion that is actually three delusions in one, packaged together, so to speak. They all come under the general heading of dependence on the good opinion of others. This little bundle combines the craving for recognition, for fame, and for worldly prominence. Anyone who harbors any one of these cravings seeks support from others for his ego, rather than developing confidence in his own self within, in his soul. To be centered in the inner self is the spiritual ideal. To base one's self-recognition, on the other hand, on the opinions of others is to build a house upon shifting sand. The opinions of most people are wrong anyway. The greatest error in courting their good opinion lies in the fact that this dependence strips one of any solid basis for self-understanding. Even when other people are right, and especially where their opinions of you are concerned, you should depend even more on your self-perception before God. Praise, Yogananda used to say, cannot make me any better. Blame cannot make me any worse. I am what I am before my conscience and God. All delusions suggest to the mind distorted images of reality. Worst of all, they make one hope for fulfillment through means that always prove in the end to be but shadows. My Guru did add this admission, even shadows may entertain. Still, shadows are without substance. In watching them, we merely entertain ourselves. I would like to ask first if you have any questions about what I've written.
How can we gain confidence in ourselves and not seek the approval of others?
This is a very important subject among psychologists in our age. They talk of self-esteem. I have had the opposite problem. I haven't had much self-esteem. I've never thought much of myself. That's one good reason why I've never been nervous in public, because I've always thought that, first of all, I was a fool, and if I am a fool, what does it matter if people see it? And so I didn't worry. They can think what they liked. And secondly, I just, I've always had, now I'm over that one, but I remember Master was saying to me, all of those who were with me were saints in the past, and I was saying, well, what about those saints who don't always seem so saintly, sir? And he said, well, some of them may be fallen saints. And I said, well, I was thinking of myself, sir. And he said, it is good to have neither a superiority nor an inferiority complex. And I had the second. But I've resolved it easily years ago by realizing that we must get ourselves out of the picture. The confidence we must feel is in God. Many times I have found that I've had to write something and I didn't know, I came to a point I could not solve it. I said, well, I can't do it, but Master can. And as soon as I thought that, I knew what to do. And I've seen that happen again and again, that he has worked through me in so many different ways. And this is the truth, that if you allow God to speak through you, to write through you, to make decisions through you, the more you think of that, the more you find that you have that confidence that nobody can shake. You just know it's right. I may have never read something before, and yet I know it's right. And I had some thought there, but I can't think of it right now. But the point is that my confidence is based not on my stupid ego, which I really want to get away from. And I think that, thank God, I've pretty well done so. But anyway, it's just a shell. Who cares for this stupid Kriyananda? But if I can be, and if Master can be living in me, then I can say something worthwhile that the whole world needs to know. And this I feel very confident about. Oh yes, I was thinking of this story. Somebody said to me many years ago that a friend of hers had said that you must have been a great writer because my style, he was praising my style, it was so clear and well written. And when I didn't take it seriously, but when I sat down to write the next day, I was working on a book, the first thought that came to my mind was, oh, I mustn't disappoint my public. And as soon as I had that thought, I could not get that sentence right. The first sentence, it was like shifting railway cars in a railway yard back and forth. Nothing worked. I must have had about 50 different combinations. The wonderful thing about English is you can say things in so many different ways. I haven't found that in other languages. But finally, I saw what a fool I was being, and I had a good laugh at my own expense. And I said, all right, Master, tell me what to do. And it came out immediately, and it was substantially different from anything I had been dreaming up. So don't look for self-esteem. This is the great mistake that so many psychologists and psychiatrists try for. Anybody who tries to develop self-esteem is just setting himself up for another knockdown. So it's not worth it. But God can work through you. And this is what I think we should do. Moreover, we should base our understanding on wisdom. I left college. I had only 6 months to go before finishing college. And I remember when Master, I mentioned this to him, he said, why does Divine Mother always do this to me? Because his guru had told him to get a BA degree. And it was useful to him. But in my life, I have found that it has never hurt me not to have a BA degree. In his case, maybe. In my life, no. I had 6 months only to go for graduation, but I thought these people are not giving me what I want. I want truth, and these people aren't giving it to me. And I never found anybody who had what I wanted. When I met Master, I was like finding that piece of paper. This is it. And so if you use discrimination, but if you aren't sure, then, you know, there's a very interesting story. It's Saint Gyaneshwar in Alipur, which is near Pune. He lived centuries ago, and his father had broken his vows, or actually what I think was what happened was that he had not told his guru that he was married. He was renouncing everything, and because he had told a lie, his guru told him to go back to his wife, and then all the Brahmins there in his village of Alandi said, you're a fallen soul, and so they treated him as an outcast. And he, to expiate that sin, committed suicide. And his children went to the Brahmins and said that, should we not be reinstated now? And they said, well, we can't we can't do it. You better go to I forget the name of the nearby town. And so they went to this town, a great distance away. And all the Brahmins there said, the Shastras are silent, so must we be. Then Gyaneshwar said, but the Gita itself says that God is in everyone, a cow, a stone, everything. And this one Brahmin came over to him and said, you mean to say he's in everything, even that buffalo over there? And he said, yes. So he said, bring that buffalo over. And he said, now make him talk. And Gandhi began speaking, and they shut his mouth up. And immediately the buffalo began. He finished the prayer. Well, this was a miracle. And when they saw this miracle, then they all accepted that he was a Brahmin, and they made him Brahmins. Now, this is the interesting statement my guru made, and I think it's well worth remembering. After seeing that movie, he said that the Brahmins were right. They had to go by the Shastras. If the Shastras didn't say that, and according to their understanding, and you can't go beyond your own understanding, as Gyandev had pointed out, the Gita did say that, but they didn't know that. So you must base your understanding of life on Shastric statements, on what is right. And if a great saint tells you something different, that's different. But we have no right to change the ancient religion. We have no right to change the truths. I myself am extremely orthodox to everything my guru said. And I saw that he himself was very orthodox to the Shastras and the teachings. He never was a revolutionary. I am not a revolutionary. I and he both tried to express these teachings in new ways that will make them understandable to people in this new age. For example, most people used to believe that prana means just the breath. But now in this age of energy, it is possible to point out that pranayama means control of the energy, not the breath. The breath is allied to the energy, it's tied to the energy. When the energy moves up in the spine, and this is the way you breathe in the astral spine, when it moves up in the spine, you automatically inhale. And when it goes down, you automatically exhale. These are truths. The breath is tied to the spine, but the deeper reality is the energy itself. And in this day and age, it is possible to declare something that was always true but not understandable, that matter doesn't exist except as a movement of vibrating energy. We can understand it literally. When people said it's just a dream, Shankara said this is just a dream. Yes, you can say it's true, but it's very difficult to understand what he meant. And yet, once you see that energy is the reality beneath matter, then you can see that it's thought that directs energy. And when you can see that thought by willpower direct energy, thoughts are manifestations of consciousness. And so it becomes finally possible to understand with our sort of galumphing logic how this universe could really be just a creation of God's. You know, all of it is duality, everything. There's duality in Maya. Without it, Maya would not exist, because God is like that one particular place in between the waves on the ocean. If you have a very high wave, it cannot change the level of the ocean, because there has to be a corresponding trough. And so the duality comes when God begins to move his consciousness. And in that movement, you have the opposite movements that create Maya. For every good, there's a bad. For every light, there's a dark. For every up, there's a down. And this is just true all across the board. To understand life, however, the worst thing you can do is try to get the truth from opinions in the newspaper. Don't listen to, let's face it, most people are wrong most of the time. Don't listen to them. I mean, you have to listen to your parents, you have to listen to your elders, but I would say even children ought to keep a little bit of reserve, as I did when I said, well, how do you know? It's true. How can they know? They tried to get me into all sorts of things I simply could not see. It used to puzzle me why these people want to go out. And I remember the day I bought Autobiography of a Yogi, it was a miracle. It was destined, you can say, because my father was then in Cairo, working there. And my mother was to go there, and I put her on the ship. The very day that I put her on that ship, I went uptown New York, and I found Autobiography of a Yogi. And, if my mother had been there, it would have been difficult for me to leave. I mean, I'd never heard the word guru before. I'd never heard dharma and karma and reincarnation. All this stuff was just completely, I knew nothing about it. But I remember in that shop when I bought this book, a friend of mine, Doug Birch, from high school, I happened to meet him in that bookstore, and he was talking about how he was going to get rich in television. Television was a very new thing then. It wasn't really on the market yet. And the more he talked, the more I was hugging this book to my heart. I knew this was my answer, and that I just couldn't see. But people run eagerly in so many different directions, like a dog chasing its tail. And where do they come at the end? Nowhere. So I've often said to people, sooner or later you're going to have to disappoint your mothers. It's a simple fact. If you want truth, then go to God. You cannot be a greater blessing on your own family than to seek God. The truth of it is that anybody who attains Kaivalya Moksha, and it's not an easy thing to attain, let's face it, anybody who does, 7 generations of his family, backwards and forwards, achieve freedom. Now, what kind of freedom? Well, certainly not the same level. It's sort of like an example I was given that an emperor, when he's made an emperor, his relatives aren't made emperors also, but they're all given a much higher position in society. And also, it doesn't mean just your close family. Most people who reach that level don't have children. But your brother and sisters, they can have children. Cousins can have children. It means a much larger crop than just your own direct descendants or antecedents. So it's a very great blessing and well worth working toward. But I look at people and I see more and more how close they are to everything that we want. There's very little keeping you, individually, you, I'm talking to you personally, very little keeping you from God. Just that thought, as Master said, on a little piece of thought rests the cosmic lot. Rub that thought away and the universe is rubbed away. You have that, you're so close to it, but there's always the thought, yes, but first, this. And after you've gone baying down that trail and you've reached the end of it, what have you got? Nothing. And you have never found anything, and you can't find anything. In fact, if you want to be mathematical about it, the sum total of all finding has to be 0. It can't be anything else. Every plus has to be cancelled out by a minus. Every gain has to be cancelled out by a loss. Every victory has to be cancelled by a defeat. It is always going to be that way. Finally, you have to just get yourself out of the way and say, I'm not involved. That's the only solution. Do everything you can to get rid of this thought, I. It's the thing, the post to which all our delusions are tied. I want this, I don't want that. I like this, I don't like that. I said to my guru one time, he had said, every desire has to be satisfied. I said to him, sir, even a desire for an ice cream cone? I thought he would smile. He didn't. He said, oh yes. Every desire. That's kind of scary, isn't it? Does that mean you have to wipe out each desire? Not really. What happens is that you attain the level of bliss where things disappear. But indeed, the stage of Jivan Mukta, which all of you should aspire to achieve in this lifetime, and I mean that, the state of Jivan Mukta means that you still have your past karma to work out. And that past karma is of maybe billions of lifetimes. There's just no way of knowing. In the Gita it says that at the beginning of a day of Brahma, I throw them all out again. That means that they've been going in another day of Brahma. And in the Rubaiyat of Omakayam, which is a very deep scripture, but very symbolic, my guru explained one passage as meaning that many who come into Maya at the beginning of a day of Brahma are still wandering in delusion at the end. Now that means billions and billions of years. It's scary, but it doesn't need to be. But all those have to be overcome. That's why almost none of the saints in Autobiography of a Yogi were Paramuktas. They weren't fully liberated. They were Jivan Muktas, freed from ego and therefore not able to create new karma, but they still have past karma to work out. And I said to Master, but couldn't you, once you're in God, just say, it's all God and overcome it that way? He said, yes, you could, but most people don't do it that way because they they use that as an excuse. It doesn't matter to them in that state. You're one with God anyway, and so they use that as their excuse to come back and help other people. So the thing that we need to work at is becoming Jivan Mukta, and even that will be a great blessing on your family. So mothers and fathers, don't stop your children if you want this, and children, don't feel you've got to obey authority if it comes. Remember what it says in the Shastras. If a principle contradicts a higher principle, it is no longer a principle. If a rule contradicts a higher rule, it is not a rule. If a truth contradicts a higher truth, it is no longer a truth. We must understand that God forever has been our parent. I remember many years ago, I had to write my father that way. I had to say that you're my father in this incarnation, and I'm grateful for it, and I respect you, and I love you. But don't try to be a rival to God. God has been my father forever, and you just for one life. Don't force me to that conclusion. He shut up from then on. But it happens. And so the thing is, we've got to get rid of this thought that I want this, I want that. Get rid of it, because it will never give you what you want. Now, I don't mean, and this is a very important point also, I don't mean that you need to suppress yourself. You can't get there. And in fact, that's a very interesting statement in the Gita. What does mere suppression accomplish? In other words, nothing. But try to channel what you do. Channel it to God. That's why you pray to God, not to give the food to God only, but to let Him eat it with you. And everything you do, feel that God is doing it with you and through you. And even if it's wrong, you might say, well, but in that case, if I do something wrong, I'd rather God didn't see that. Well, that's not so. That's not the right attitude. You should try to bring God even into your worst mistakes, because the more you realize, and Master said he likes that. God likes that. He likes to feel that you're making him responsible for your mistakes, because then he can correct them. As long as you keep him over here, he can't correct them. But if you feel that you're acting through me, then bit by bit you find that you can do it well. And so the more you live for God, the more everything will go right. The less you live for God, the more everything will go wrong. And don't worry, don't suppress, but try to channel those things which you can't help doing. Try to channel them toward God. Bring them into the act. Make him responsible. Share it with him. And you'll find suddenly it won't exist anymore. You will look at something or someone that will seem very attractive, and you won't be able to get that thing or that person out of your mind. And then you think of this bliss that you're affirming or that you have. Suddenly that attraction doesn't exist anymore. It just goes up into cloud. Live in that thought. This is why it's a very interesting thing. I mentioned this last time. The Ashwatthama. You know, it's a very intriguing part of the Mahabharata. Ashwatthama is a very unusual case. He is the son of Drona. Drona, here again, is a very interesting thing. Drona is the guru of both the Pandavas and the Kurus, right? But in the battle of Kurukshetra, he sides with the Kurus. Why? Because habit is what reinforces our delusions. But what gives strength to our spiritual qualities is not just habit. You aren't kind, humble, sincerely truthful, all the virtues you can get. You aren't that just from habit. There is a higher thing that comes into play when you are virtuous. Whereas in Maya, habit directs you. And so it's your habits that make you drink, it's your habits that make you smoke, it's your habits that make you do things. Now, if you have these habits, never say to yourself, never say, I have failed. I had this experience when I was 21. I had smoked for some few years, not many, but then I decided I wanted to be a hermit. And I thought, who ever heard of a hermit who smokes? And I thought, well, I mean, as a hermit, I wouldn't have the money to go off and buy cigarettes, so I've got to overcome this taste for cigarettes. And it was like what Mark Twain made the comment, smoking is the easiest habit in the world to overcome. I've done it 1,000 times. And this is what I was doing, that I would remember how nice it was to smoke when I took that cup of coffee after a meal, and before I knew it, I was back. But here's the important thing. I never said to myself, oh, I've failed. I always said, I haven't yet succeeded. Remember that. Whenever you make an affirmation to change, don't beat yourself if you fail. Just say, I haven't yet succeeded. What I found that was doing was gradually reinforcing my affirmation of success. And after a year, I just looked at cigarettes and I thought, I don't want them anymore. A roommate of mine, this was in Charleston, South Carolina, he laughed. He said, oh, I've heard that one before. But I didn't. I knew I didn't. And I had a little half-empty packet of cigarettes, and I passed them out to my friends. Had no desire. So remember that you can overcome these things, but always, in any case, and this is the other trick, think of God as working through you. Now, Ashwatthama, I said Drona was habit, and that's why Drona sided with the Kauravas. But Ashwatthama was his child. Now, Lahiri Mahasaya explained that the whole Mahabharata is a very deep allegory. I mean, you can teach these things openly. Why put them in allegory? I think partly because the world was sinking into Kali Yuga, but also it's fun. And you remember a truth better if it's told in allegorical form. And so Ashwatthama stands for attraction. And when Yudhishthira was wanting to kill Drona, Drona couldn't be beaten. And then he got the idea to name he didn't want to be untruthful, so he named his elephant Ashwatthama. And so he said, Ashwatthama, the elephant, is dead. And Drona got so disheartened at this that he allowed himself to be killed. Well, the truth of it is that if you want to overcome a habit, like me with smoking, I dissociated myself from it. I said it's dead. I didn't say, oh, well, I've got this problem, and I just refused to accept that it was mine. I just said I haven't yet succeeded. So do tell yourself, if you want to overcome something, it will be fooling yourself in the beginning, but tell yourself anyway, that is not me. And that's what this man did when he took Kriya, and he was an alcoholic. And he would do a few Kriyas and take another sip and do a few more Kriyas. But in the end, he felt so much bliss inwardly that he no longer had that desire. Now here's another very interesting thing about Ashwatthama. All the other Kauravas they were killed. And Krishna said in the 2nd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that there is no such thing as death. Those soldiers who are killed here will continue through many incarnations. Now that was a literal truth, but there's a much deeper and more important truth to be borne in mind. And this is what the Gita and the Mahabharata really were talking about. That all the qualities that you think as your own are really like a huge nation. You have billions of attributes. Some of them are buried, some of them are uppermost in your mind, but all of them are with you. You're like a whole nation of people with all these different qualities. They're all your relatives. And it's very difficult to overcome any delusion as long as you think, but that's me. You see, this is the problem people have. They think, well, but I identify with that. Well, as long as you identify with it, you can't overcome it. And so what happened to the Kauravas was that they were killed, but then they became the opposite quality. This is spiritually speaking. For example, anger became calmness. Hatred became love. All those negative qualities become positive qualities. But here's the interesting thing. Ashwatthama stands for attraction. And there's no opposite side to attraction. In divine consciousness, divine bliss, Ananda, is Rasha, the supremely enjoyable. And so it's a very interesting thing that at the end of the battle, at the end of the war of Kurukshetra, he went in the dead of night and killed all those heroes. And you think, what kind of a story is this? Well, the truth of it is that you can't carry into samadhi any human quality. This is why Moses in the Bible had to die before he could enter the promised land, because he was the soul. He was the soul guide within. Your soul cannot enter into God in its human way. It has to shed all its humanity. You can't be humble. Somebody said to Master one time, how humble you are. He said, how can there be humility when there is no consciousness of self? A marvelous answer. You cannot be kind when you're love itself. I remember I said to him, I used to pray to him, help me to love you as you love me. And he looked at me a few days later and he said, because I prayed this in my own meditations, and he said, how can the cup hold the whole ocean? It can't. We have to understand that all our qualities, as long as they're identified with the ego, they're limited. Whereas we have to become limitless bliss. That is supremely attractive. And so all these heroes which we use, like humility and kindness and all these things to try to win in the battle of Kurukshetra within ourselves, even they have to go at the end of the war, and all that must remain is the supreme bliss of the infinite. This is the marvelous teaching, and it's a deep truth. But in your own lives, think of it also, because everybody has human problems, so they wouldn't be here. But if you will just think in your heart of, if you don't feel bliss, if you do, all the better, but if you don't, think of it, and think of that as your reality. But if you do feel it, all the better. Just think about that, and you won't have any feeling about anything else. So there are wonderful truths that are, I have to say this much, there is no place in the world where these truths are taught except India. Jesus Christ taught them. Buddha taught them. Great masters have taught them in all religions. Moses taught them. I asked Master, was Moses enlightened? He said, oh yes. But their followers have not taught them. And there are many Hindus today who don't understand at all what Kaivalya Moksha means. But at least it is taught here. It's in the Shastras. It is something that if you study deeply enough, you will have to understand. And if you are a Vaishnava who thinks that your eternity is going to be spent doing Rasha Leela with Krishna in Vaikuntha, you might as well rethink that one a little bit. Even Rasha Leela will get awfully boring if it's just your body dancing. That's ridiculous. But the Indian teachings are profound for the one reason that they have maintained this highest of all truths, Kaivalya Moksha. And there's so many paths that lead up that mountain, but all of them lead to that peak. Jesus Christ knew that. Buddha knew that. Moses knew that. The truth is that that truth that you are seeking is in you. When the Divine Mother asked Ganesha to go on a pilgrimage, he went around her. That was his pilgrimage. God and Guru are we don't need to go anywhere else. And although I have gone to saints, I have not gone for teaching, because I have found that the teaching, you can't always pair it. It's true in its way, but if I'm following this way, that way won't work. And for example, Ananda Ma was not interested in work. And she was just interested in people going off and meditating. Well, but my guru had told me your life is one of intense activity. And he was reading my own deep nature too, because I had this intense desire to share these teachings with people. Even when I was coming across the bus, in a bus from New York to Los Angeles to meet him, I was thinking, this is such a fantastic teaching, I want to share it with everybody. And so if I had gone her way, I wouldn't have gone his way, but his way has given me what I need. And I know it and I feel it. But we must be, at the same time, we must understand that above all, we are going inside ourselves. That truth that you're seeking is in yourself, like the story I have mentioned of the musk deer, which is a deer in the Himalaya, which at a certain season secretes the pouch of musk fragrance in its navel. And it runs everywhere looking for this wonderful fragrance. And sometimes it will leap off high crags and crash to its death, always seeking this fragrance. And then the hunter comes and takes that pouch and sells it for a costly fragrance in the market. And the poet said, I don't know which poet, but said, "O musk deer, if only you had known that that which you were seeking was inside your own self." This is the goal of life. Don't look here, there, and everywhere. Wherever you go, you will take your own self with you. That is your temple. There was a woman who came from London to meet Ramana Maharshi, and she said to him, "I have come a long way to meet you." He said, "You haven't moved. The world has moved. Your perception has moved. You have not moved." You know, it's another very interesting thing that we can say nowadays that could not have been said before. Back when people used to think that the world is everything, people thought that once they discovered the stars move, they thought the world is the center of all that too. Even as late as the end of the 19th century, people thought the sun was the center of everything. And then when I was a schoolboy in England in the 1930s, a teacher came to me and he said, "You know, all the stars you see at night, they're only part of one star system." He said, it has been found that there are 2 and maybe 3 other star systems. That was back in the 30s. Now they know that there are 100 billion star systems, and now they call them galaxies. That's in my lifetime that knowledge has come forward. And yet, here is the interesting thing, that from a universe that seems to have no center anywhere, we've reached the point of understanding that we are the center of the universe. Because the center of the universe, as it says in the Shastras, is center everywhere, circumference nowhere. God is center at every point. He comes into a manifestation, growing out of a simple germ into a body. From a little seed, he becomes a plant. Everything is from inside out. Everything begins at the center. And whereas the science will never be able to know the entire nature of an atom, it is possible to find the nature of your own self. That is the one atom you can ever possibly explore. That is the duty God has placed within each one of us. We are the center of everything that needs to be known in this universe. And the wonderful thing is that once you discover that truth, you discover everything. And so you become one with the whole universe. Well, you have things to talk about, so I must not talk longer. God bless you.